The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, 40 Years of Lethal Deception. Act I, The Cold Open and the Iceberg Promise. Scene start. Visual, the screen is pitch black. A single, rhythmic sound plays, the ticking of a metronome, slow and deliberate, mimicking a failing heartbeat. After 5 seconds, a stark, white document fades into the center of the screen. It is heavily redacted. The unredacted words read, "Do not treat." Audio, cold, detached, authoritative voiceover. Pacing is slow, leaving room for the weight of the words. There is a fundamental assumption embedded in the fabric of modern society: when you are sick, the healers will attempt to heal you. You offer them your body, your trust, and in return, they offer their expertise to pull you back from the precipice of death. But what happens when the healers are not there to pull you back? What happens when they are simply there to watch you fall? Pause 3 seconds. Visual, grainy, archival black and white footage of rural Alabama in the 1930s. Men in overalls, faces worn by the relentless southern sun, walking down dusty dirt roads. Their expressions are stoic, completely unaware of the invisible machinery already moving against them. Audio, voiceover continues, completely devoid of emotion. This is not a story of a medical mistake. Mistakes are anomalies. Mistakes are born of negligence or a lack of knowledge. This is a story of meticulous, bureaucratic, and highly orchestrated observation. It is the story of an experiment that did not last for weeks or months, but for 40 years. 40 years of watching the human body rot from the inside out. 40 years of actively denying a known cure to men who believed they were receiving the best medical care the United States government could provide. Visual, a montage of official medical seals, the United States Public Health Service, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The images slowly invert, turning from positive to negative, casting a sinister, X-ray-like glow. Audio. When we look into the annals of classified files and dark medical history, we often expect to find rogue scientists operating in hidden, subterranean laboratories. We look for the madman. We look for the monster. But the most terrifying aspect of the Tuskegee Syphilis study is the sheer banality of its evil. This was not the work of a lone sociopath. This was a federally funded, institutionally approved, globally recognized study conducted by upstanding men of science who published their findings in the most prestigious medical journals in the world. Visual, an animated iceberg graphic appears. The tip shows the phrase, "unethical medical experiment." The camera slowly pans down, deep underwater, revealing the massive, jagged base of the iceberg with phrases like, "intentional withholding of penicillin, active disinformation campaigns, government surveillance, and generational trauma." Audio. The surface narrative is simple, a study on the natural progression of untreated syphilis in black men. But as we descend into the archives, as we strip away the clinical jargon and read the private letters between the doctors, we uncover a labyrinth of deception. We will examine the exact methodology of the lie. We will dissect the letters where doctors actively conspired to prevent these men from receiving life-saving antibiotics. We will look at the mechanics of how an entire medical establishment convinced itself that observing a slow, agonizing death was a scientific imperative. This is the dark psychology factory. Today, we open the files on the Tuskegee Syphilis study. Prepare to understand the anatomy of institutional betrayal. Scene end. ACT 2, The Genesis of Deception, the 1920s Context and Conceptualization. Scene start. Visual, a start timeline appears on screen. The year, 1928, locks into place with a mechanical clack. The background is a sepia-tone map of Macon County, Alabama. Audio, analytical, slow and deliberate. To understand how an atrocity of this magnitude is sanctioned, we must first understand the clinical mindset of the era. We must look at the foundation upon which the lie was built. The year is 1928. The Oslo study of untreated syphilis in white males had just published its retrospective findings. The scientific community was intrigued by the progression of the disease, but a dangerous, pseudoscientific hypothesis permeated the medical echelons of the United States. Visual, pages from early 20th century medical journals flash across the screen. Words like racial differences, cardiovascular, and neurological are highlighted in stark red. Audio. The prevailing, racially driven theory of the time suggested that syphilis affected different races in fundamentally different ways. The theory posited that in white populations, the disease primarily attacked the central nervous system, leading to neurological degradation and insanity. In black populations, the medical consensus, driven entirely by bias rather than empirical evidence, was that the disease primarily attacked the cardiovascular system, sparing the brain. Visual, a photograph of Dr. Taliaferro Clark, stern and bespectacled, staring coldly into the camera. His name and title appear, Dr. Taliaferro Clark, Chief of the United States Public Health Service Venereal Disease Division. Audio. Enter Dr. Taliaferro Clark. Clark was not a fringe element. He was the chief of the United States Public Health Service Venereal Disease Division. Clark saw an opportunity in Macon County, Alabama. The county was deeply impoverished, rural, and had an exceptionally high rate of syphilis infection. Initially, the USPHS, in conjunction with the Julius Rosenwald Fund, had initiated a philanthropic effort to test and treat the population using the heavy metal therapies of the day, arsphenamine, commonly known as salvarsan, and bismuth. These treatments were toxic, required months of painful injections, and had marginal success rates, but they were the standard of care. Visual, stock market crash footage of 1929. The numbers plummeting. The Rosenwald Fund logo fading into darkness. Audio. But the Great Depression struck. The Rosenwald Fund, hemorrhaging money, withdrew its financial support. The treatment program in Macon County was slated for termination. It is here, in the vacuum of funding, that the scientific objective pivoted from healing to observation. Dr. Clark proposed a fundamentally different approach. If they could not afford to treat the population, they would study them. They would create an American equivalent to the Oslo study, but with a crucial, fatal difference. The Oslo study was retrospective, analyzing past records. The Tuskegee study would be prospective. They would watch the disease unfold in real time. Visual, an internal memo fades onto the screen, typewriter font clacking out the words, the unprecedented opportunity for the study of the effect of untreated syphilis. Audio. The official justification was wrapped in the impenetrable armor of scientific necessity. Clark and his colleagues argued that Macon County provided a ready-made laboratory. The subjects were already infected. They were poor. They were largely uneducated. And most importantly to the researchers, they were isolated. The researchers hypothesized that the subjects would never seek medical care on their own, making them the perfect, undisturbed control group. Visual: a complex web diagram appears. At the center is the USPHS. Branching out are nodes labeled Tuskegee Institute, Macon County Health Department, and local black physicians. Audio. But the USPHS knew they could not conduct this study as outsiders. They needed local legitimacy. They needed trust. And so, they co-opted the very institutions the community relied upon. They partnered with the Tuskegee Institute, a highly respected historically black university. They recruited Dr. Eugene Dibble, the head of the John A. Andrew Memorial Hospital at the Institute. And most crucially, they hired Eunice Rivers, a local black nurse, to act as the primary liaison between the government doctors and the test subjects. Visual: a photograph of Nurse Eunice Rivers. She is smiling, looking compassionate. The image is slowly desaturated until it is a cold gray. Audio. Nurse Rivers was the linchpin. She was the familiar face, the comforting voice, the trusted authority figure who translated the cold directives of Washington doctors into the warm dialect of rural Alabama. To the men, she was Miss Rivers. She drove them to their appointments. She provided hot meals. She listened to their troubles. She was the mechanism of compliance. Without her, the deception could not have taken root. Visual: a stark ledger appears, counting up to the number 399. Audio. By 1932, the experiment was officially underway. 399 men with latent syphilis, and a control group of 201 uninfected men, were enrolled. The subjects were never told the name of their illness. They were never told they were part of an experiment. They were told a meticulously crafted lie that would dictate the rest of their lives. Scene end. Act 3, the illusion of treatment and the spinal taps. Scene start. Visual: the camera slowly pans across an old, weathered medical chart. The diagnosis field is blank. Instead, stamped in red ink across the top is the phrase, "bad blood." Audio: the ticking metronome returns, slightly faster. The voiceover is clinical, dissecting the terminology. The architecture of a perfect lie requires a foundation of partial truth. The doctors of the USPHS understood that they could not simply observe the men without offering something in return. The men were feeling ill, they experienced the latent symptoms of a systemic infection. They expected medical intervention. The solution was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation, the weaponization of colloquial terminology. Visual: text on screen, syphilis, medical, fades out. Bad blood, colloquial, fades in. Audio. The men were told they were being treated for bad blood. In the rural South of the 1930s, bad blood was a catch-all term. It could mean anemia, fatigue, indigestion, or a host of other minor ailments. It was a term devoid of the severe, stigmatizing weight of a venereal disease. By diagnosing the men with bad blood, the researchers achieved two critical objectives. First, they circumvented the need to explain the actual, terminal nature of the infection. Second, they established a pretext for invasive medical procedures disguised as therapy. Visual: a vintage bottle of pink medicine, and a bottle of aspirin. They sit on a sterile steel tray. Audio. To maintain the illusion of treatment, the men were given placebos. They were handed bottles of pink medicine, essentially aspirin and mineral supplements. They were given heavy metal ointments in doses far too small to have any therapeutic effect on syphilis, but just enough to cause minor side effects, convincing the men that the medicine was working. The men believed they were receiving state-of-the-art care from the highest medical authorities in the nation. They were, in fact, receiving nothing but the psychological comfort of a lie. Visual, a letter from Dr. Oliver Wenger to Dr. Taliaferro Clark. The text is highlighted as it is read. Audio. The cynical nature of this deception is documented in the private correspondence of the architects. Dr. Oliver Wenger, a prominent USPHS official, wrote to Dr. Clark regarding the methodology. He stated, "We must fool them. It was not an accidental omission. It was a calculated strategy." Wenger further advised that the men should not be told they were part of an experiment, warning that they might not cooperate if they knew the truth. Visual, a stark, clinical illustration of a lumbar puncture, spinal tap. A long needle is shown entering the spine. Audio. But the most egregious violation of the early years was the lumbar puncture. As the disease progressed, the researchers needed to know if the syphilis had entered the central nervous system. To determine this, they required cerebrospinal fluid. A spinal tap is a highly invasive, incredibly painful procedure. In the 1930s, performed without modern anesthetics in a rural clinic setting, it carried significant risks of infection, severe headaches, and paralysis. Visual, a chilling USPHS recruitment letter flashes on screen. The heading reads in bold letters, "Special free treatment." Audio. How do you convince hundreds of men to submit to a painful, dangerous, and purely diagnostic procedure? You rebrand it. The USPHS sent out letters to the subjects, urgently requesting their presence for a special free treatment. The letter warned them that this was their last chance for this unique care. It was a masterpiece of coercive marketing. Visual, close-up of a needle. The background is blurred, showing the silhouette of a man bent over an examination table. Audio. The men arrived, expecting a cure for their bad blood. Instead, they were subjected to a diagnostic spinal tap. They endured agonizing pain, believing it was the necessary price for healing. The researchers extracted the fluid, analyzed the neurological degradation, recorded the data, and sent the men home with aspirin. The procedure offered absolutely zero therapeutic benefit. It was a pure data extraction exercise, paid for with the agony of the deceived. Scene end. Act 4, the penicillin withholding and the active conspiracy. Scene start. Visual, a calendar flips rapidly. 1935, 1938. 1941, it stops on 1943. Footage of World War II soldiers being treated with a miraculous new drug. The word penicillin dominates the screen. Audio, the tone shifts from analytical to an intense, quiet outrage. If the study had ended in the 1930s, it would still rank as a massive ethical failure. But what elevates the Tuskegee study from a violation of informed consent to a prolonged act of passive execution is what happened next. The defining element of the atrocity was not the initiation of the study, but its continuation in the face of a cure. Visual, microscopic footage of penicillium mold destroying bacteria. Audio. By 1943, the medical landscape was fundamentally transformed. Penicillin was proven to be an effective, highly reliable, and safe cure for syphilis. It was a medical miracle. By 1947, it had become the universally accepted standard of care. It was widely available. The USPHS itself was aggressively running public health campaigns to eradicate syphilis using penicillin clinics nationwide. Everywhere, that is, except in Macon County, Alabama. Visual, a photograph of Dr. Raymond Vonderler, the new director of the study. His face is stoic, unreadable. Audio. Under the leadership of Dr. Raymond Vonderler, the USPHS made a conscious, documented decision. They chose the data over the lives of the men. To administer penicillin would end the experiment. It would ruin the ready-made laboratory. The researchers rationalized that because the men had the disease for so long, the damage was already done, and the cure might not reverse the effects. But this was a hypothesis, not a fact. And it was a hypothesis tested by withholding the cure entirely. Visual, a montage of bureaucratic paperwork. Draft boards, local health department rosters, lists of names. A red X is stamped next to various names. Audio. The denial of penicillin was not passive. It required an active, continuous, and highly coordinated conspiracy to ensure the men remained infected. As World War II raged, many of the men in the study registered for the draft. The military conducted mandatory blood tests. The military doctors discovered the syphilis and ordered the men to be treated before they could serve. Visual, an urgent memo from the USPHS to the local draft board. The text highlights, "Do not treat. These men are part of a special study." Audio. The USPHS intervened. They contacted the local draft boards. They provided a list of the 399 subjects and explicitly ordered the military not to treat them. The government actively prevented its own citizens from receiving a cure mandated by the armed forces. They drafted these men for war, but denied them the medicine required to survive it. Visual, a map of Alabama. Red dots appear, representing rapid treatment centers that were opening across the state. A black circle surrounds Macon County. Audio. Later, in the 1950s, rapid treatment centers for syphilis opened across the South. These centers actively sought out infected individuals. The USPHS went to extraordinary lengths to ensure the Tuskegee subjects did not wander into these clinics. They supplied lists of the subjects to the local health departments and the treatment centers with strict instructions: if any of these men appear, turn them away. Do not administer penicillin. Visual, a close-up of Nurse Rivers' ledger. Audio. Nurse Rivers tracked the men meticulously. If a man moved to another county, or even another state, the USPHS tracked him down. They contacted the local health authorities in the new jurisdiction, informing them of the subject's status and ordering them to withhold treatment. The subjects were prisoners within a microscopic panopticon. They were free to move, but they could not escape the invisible barrier that kept the cure just out of reach. Visual, fading photographs of the subjects. Overlaid text shows their causes of death: aortic aneurysm, heart failure, neurosyphilis. Audio. The results were catastrophic. Men went blind. Men went insane. Men died of cardiovascular failure as the bacteria slowly devoured their aortic valves. The disease was passed to their wives, who were completely unaware of their husband's true condition. It was passed to their children, born with congenital syphilis. The USPHS watched the devastation unfold, recording every tremor, every failing heartbeat, logging it all into neat, scientific tables. They had established a perimeter of death, and they guarded it fiercely for decades. Scene end. Act V, Decades of Complicity and Institutional Blindness. Scene start. Visual, the screen is split. On the left, a prestigious medical conference in the 1950s. Men in suits clapping politely. On the right, a dilapidated shack in rural Alabama. A man struggles to breathe. Audio, the tone is incredulous, questioning the nature of scientific morality. How does a conspiracy of this magnitude sustain itself for 40 years? The answer is chilling in its simplicity: it was never treated as a conspiracy. It was treated as peer-reviewed science. The most profound horror of the Tuskegee study is not that it was hidden in the shadows, it is that it was conducted in the broad daylight of the medical establishment. Visual, a series of scientific journals stack up rapidly on screen. The Journal of the American Medical Association, Archives of Internal Medicine, Public Health Reports. Audio. Throughout the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, the USPHS continuously published the data from the study in the most respected medical journals in the world. They presented their findings at major medical conferences. The methodology was open. The lack of treatment was explicitly stated. Over a span of 4 decades, more than a dozen major articles were published detailing the mortality rates and the specific mechanisms by which the untreated syphilis was destroying the bodies of the subjects. Visual, an abstract from one of the papers is highlighted. The text clearly states, an evaluation of the effect of untreated syphilis. Audio. Thousands of doctors, researchers, and public health officials read these papers. They reviewed the data. They saw the explicit acknowledgement that penicillin was being withheld from a control group. Yet, for nearly 4 decades, there was no outcry. There was no institutional revolt. The medical community at large accepted the premise. They accepted the dehumanization of the subjects in the name of longitudinal data. Visual, Dr. John Heller, the director of the USPHS Venereal Disease Division in the 1950s, is shown giving an interview. Audio. When later questioned about the morality of the study, Dr. John Heller, who oversaw the project during the post-penicillin era, offered a defense that encapsulates the terrifying detachment of the bureaucratic mind. He stated, the men's status did not warrant ethical debate. They were subjects, not patients, clinical material, not sick people. Visual, the words, clinical material, appear on screen, slowly burning away like ash. Audio. This is the alchemy of institutional evil. By redefining human beings as clinical material, the doctors absolved themselves of the Hippocratic Oath. The men were no longer patients requiring care, they were data points requiring observation. The study had become a self-sustaining bureaucratic entity. It was an institution in its own right, passed down from one director to the next, a morbid tradition that no one inside the system had the courage or the moral clarity to question. Visual, an autopsy table. Cold, stainless steel. Audio. The macabre climax of the observation was the autopsy. To truly understand the internal devastation of the disease, the researchers needed to dissect the bodies of the deceased subjects. To ensure cooperation from the grieving families, the USPHS offered a grim incentive: burial stipends. For $50, paid to the funeral home, the family agreed to allow a full autopsy. The researchers essentially bought the final data points with the promise of a dignified burial. They monitored the men until their dying breath, and then they claimed their corpses. Scene end. Act 6, The Whistleblower and the Fallout. Scene start. Visual, the year 1966 appears. The sounds of the civil rights movement echo faintly in the background: protests, speeches, changing times. The image transitions to a young, sharp-featured man in a suit. His name appears: Peter Buxton, Venereal Disease Investigator, USPHS. Audio, the pacing quickens. The music shifts from a slow drone to a tense, investigative rhythm. By the mid-1960s, the social fabric of the United States was tearing and reforming. The civil rights movement was forcing a reckoning with systemic racism. Yet, the Tuskegee study continued, an agonizing relic of a bygone era, insulated by its own bureaucratic momentum. It took an outsider, a young man who had not been indoctrinated into the culture of the study, to finally recognize the monster for what it was. Visual, a typewriter aggressively clacking, punching holes in paper. Audio. In 1966, Peter Buxton, a 28-year-old psychiatric social worker and venereal disease investigator newly hired by the USPHS in San Francisco, stumbled upon the internal reports of the study. He was horrified. He did not see clinical material. He saw a prolonged, government-sanctioned atrocity. Visual, a formal letter addressed to the director of the Division of Venereal Diseases. The words "severe moral and ethical implications" are highlighted. Audio. Buxton did what thousands of doctors before him had failed to do: he formally protested. He sent a searing letter to his superiors at the CDC, which had taken over the study, demanding its immediate termination. He equated the study to the Nazi medical experiments that had been prosecuted at Nuremberg. He pointed out the blatant racism, the lack of informed consent, and the criminal withholding of a known cure. Visual, a boardroom door closing. Silhouettes of men in suits arguing behind frosted glass. Audio. The CDC's response was a masterclass in bureaucratic stonewalling. They convened a review panel. The panel consisted of doctors deeply entrenched in the study's history. Unsurprisingly, they concluded that the study should continue until all the subjects had died and been autopsied. They argued that stopping the study now would render the previous decades of data useless. They prioritized the sunk cost of the data over the lives of the remaining survivors. Buxton was reprimanded and essentially told to drop the matter. Visual, a close-up of an envelope being slid under a door. Audio. For several years, Buxton tried to dismantle the study from within, sending more letters, arguing with superiors, and threatening to go to the press. The CDC remained immovable. Finally, in 1972, knowing the internal routes were exhausted, Buxton broke the chain of command. He leaked the documents. He provided the internal memos, the letters detailing the withholding of penicillin, and the autopsy reports to Jean Heller, an investigative reporter for the Associated Press. Visual, a massive printing press rolling. Newspapers flying off the line. The headline screams in bold, black ink: syphilis victims in U.S. study went untreated for 40 years. The date is July 25, 1972. Audio. On July 25, 1972, the story broke. The iceberg was finally dragged into the light. The public reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The sheer duration of the experiment, the deliberate deception, the targeting of impoverished black men, it shattered the illusion of the benevolent medical establishment. It was a national scandal of unprecedented proportions. Visual, a chaotic scene of press conferences, politicians pounding podiums, CDC officials looking defensive under flashing camera bulbs. Audio. Within days, congressional hearings were demanded. Senator Edward Kennedy convened a special committee. The CDC, under immense public and political pressure, could no longer defend the indefensible. The study, which had ground on relentlessly for 4 decades through the Great Depression, World War II, and the Civil Rights Movement, was terminated almost overnight. The administrative machinery that had kept the men sick was finally dismantled by the power of public outrage. Visual, a stark tally counter clicking rapidly. Audio. But the termination came far too late. By 1972, of the original 399 infected men, only 74 were still alive. 28 had died directly of syphilis. 100 had died of related complications. 40 of their wives had been infected. And 19 of their children had been born with congenital syphilis. The data had been collected. The human cost was paid in full. Scene end. Act 7, The Legacy of Distrust and the Lingering Shadow. Scene start. Visual, the camera slowly tracks across a quiet, modern cemetery in Macon County. The headstones are simple, many weathered by time. The sun is setting, casting long, dark shadows over the graves. Audio, the voiceover is somber, reflective, and warning of the long-term psychological damage. The physical study ended in 1972, but the psychological experiment was just beginning. You cannot orchestrate a 40-year deception of a marginalized community and expect the consequences to vanish when the funding stops. The Tuskegee syphilis study did not merely destroy the bodies of the men it exploited, it fundamentally fractured the relationship between the African American community and the American medical establishment. Visual, a montage of news clips from the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s. Headlines discussing vaccine hesitancy, clinical trial disparities, and medical mistrust among minority populations. Audio. The legacy of the study is a pervasive, generational trauma. It is the lingering suspicion, deeply rooted in historical fact, that the people in the white coats are not there to help, but to experiment. When public health officials wonder why certain communities are hesitant to participate in clinical trials, or why there is a deep-seated distrust of government medical mandates, the answer is etched into the graves of Macon County. The Tuskegee study proved that the paranoia was entirely justified. Visual, the cover of the Belmont report appears, highlighted with a golden glow. The words, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, are emphasized. Audio. In the immediate aftermath, the government attempted to legislate morality. The National Research Act was signed into law in 1974, creating the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. This led to the creation of the Belmont Report, the foundational document of modern medical ethics. It established the principles of informed consent, requiring researchers to prioritize the well-being of the patient over the pursuit of scientific data. It mandated the creation of institutional review boards to oversee all human research. Visual footage from 1997. President Bill Clinton standing at a podium in the White House, facing a group of elderly African American men. He looks deeply solemn. Audio. In 1997, decades after the damage was done, the United States government formally apologized. President Bill Clinton stood before the few remaining survivors and admitted what the world already knew. He said, "The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong." Visual, the screen fades to black. Only the slow ticking of the metronome remains. It ticks 3 times, then abruptly stops. Audio. But an apology cannot unwrite history. The Tuskegee Syphilis study stands as the ultimate case study in the dark psychology of institutionalized medicine. It demonstrates the terrifying ease with which highly educated, fundamentally rational people can convince themselves that an atrocity is a necessity. It is a reminder that without relentless ethical vigilance, the pursuit of knowledge can easily become the machinery of destruction. We unearth these files not merely to look at the horrors of the past, but to recognize the mechanisms of deception. Because the institutions remain. The bureaucracy remains. And the dark capacity to value data over humanity is a disease that has never truly been cured. This has been the Dark Psychology Factory. Keep watching the shadows. Scene end. Image prompts, 10 to 15 prompts for video production. 1. Image prompt, a hyperrealistic, stark, top-down view of a vintage 1930s medical file on a dark wooden desk. The folder is manila, heavily worn, and stamped with the words, "Restricted, Tuskegee Study," in faded red ink. A single black pen and a pair of round, wire-rimmed glasses lie next to it. The lighting is low and cinematic, casting long, ominous shadows across the desk. 2. Image prompt, a chilling, black-and-white style illustration of a massive, jagged iceberg submerged in dark, murky water. The tiny tip above the water reads, "Unethical Medical Experiment," while the massive, terrifying bulk hidden beneath the water is covered in faint, ghostly text reading, "Intentional withholding of penicillin, active disinformation, and 40 years of deception." 3. Image prompt, a photorealistic portrait of an empty, rural Alabama crossroads in the 1930s. The scene is dusty and desolate under a harsh, glaring sun. A lone, black, unmarked 1930s Ford sedan is parked in the distance, partially obscured by heat distortion, symbolizing the arrival of the government researchers. 4. Image prompt, a close-up, highly detailed image of a vintage glass medicine bottle from the 1930s. The bottle is filled with a bright, unnaturally pink liquid. The label is partially peeled off, revealing the handwritten words, "Bad blood treatment." The background is a sterile, out-of-focus medical tray, creating a stark contrast between the colloquial label and the clinical setting. 5. Image prompt, a dark, moody illustration of a long, terrifying medical needle hovering over a heavily shadowed human spine. The image is rendered in a cold, metallic color palette, blues and grays, to evoke clinical detachment. The needle acts as the sole source of light in the composition, highlighting the horror of the diagnostic spinal taps. 6. Image prompt, a hyperrealistic image of a weathered, vintage ledger book open to a page filled with handwritten names. The names are slightly blurred, but next to several names are stark, aggressively stamped red XS. A magnifying glass rests on the page, distorting the ink. The lighting is dim, resembling a clandestine office at night. 7. Image prompt, a cinematic, high-contrast image of a 1940s newspaper clipping partially obscured by a pristine, glowing veil of penicillin. The newspaper headline reads, "World War II rages," but the focus is on the golden liquid in the vial, highlighting the miraculous cure that was intentionally kept away from the subjects. 8. Image prompt, a conceptual, haunting image of a microscopic view of the syphilis bacteria, Treponema pallidum, intertwined with bureaucratic red tape. The corkscrew-shaped bacteria are glowing a toxic green, trapped within endless loops of physical red ribbon, symbolizing the institutional bureaucracy that allowed the disease to spread. 9. Image prompt, a split-screen composition. The left side is a brightly lit, immaculate 1950s medical conference room with well-dressed white doctors reviewing charts. The right side is a dark, decaying wooden shack in rural Alabama, lit only by a single, flickering oil lamp, showing an empty rocking chair. The contrast highlights the extreme detachment of the researchers. 10. Image prompt, a hyperrealistic close-up of a vintage typewriter. The keys are slightly rusted, and a piece of paper is rolled in. The type bars are frozen mid-strike, imprinting the words, "Do not treat," onto the paper. The focus is extremely shallow, blurring everything except the typed words, conveying the cold, mechanical nature of the deception. 11. Image prompt, a shadowy silhouette of a nurse standing in the doorway of a rural southern home. She is holding a small medical bag. The lighting comes entirely from behind her, rendering her face featureless and ominous. This image represents the complex, coercive role of the local liaison in maintaining the deception. 12. Image prompt, a dramatic, wide-angle shot of a massive wall of filing cabinets fading into infinite darkness. The drawers are slightly open, spilling out endless streams of medical charts and autopsy reports. The image represents the sheer volume of data collected over the 40-year study, burying the humanity of the subjects in paperwork. 13. Image prompt, a photorealistic image of a rusted, locked chain-link fence. Behind the fence is a modern medical clinic with a bright neon sign reading, "Penicillin available." The focus is on the heavy, rusted padlock on the fence, symbolizing the invisible, systemic barriers erected by the government to keep the subjects away from the cure. 14. Image prompt, a powerful, stark image of an old, weathered gravestone in a grassy field. The name is obscured by moss, but deeply engraved beneath it are the dates, 1932 to 1972. A single, pristine white doctor's coat is draped over the headstone, fluttering in a cold wind, symbolizing the betrayal of the medical oath. 15. Image prompt, a conceptual illustration of a human heart trapped inside a complex, intricate mechanical clock or metronome. The gears of the clock are sharp and imposing. The image represents the agonizing, slow progression of the disease being meticulously timed and observed by an unfeeling bureaucracy,